Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me as we explore together a book review of Alexandre Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo. Now right off the bat, I want to do some spoiler alerts. There are going to be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't read the book, I'd encourage you to go read it and read the unabridged version. Don't read the abridged version, read the unabridged version. I know it's long, but I promise you it's worth it. Unabridged versions can range anywhere from like 1,000 to 1,500 pages. But even though it is a super long book, I promise you it is engaging. And I was surprised at how engaging this book is as you read through it and get through all the different pieces of it, and how it takes what can seem like insignificant details from one part of the book and masterfully weave it together in a way that's satisfying towards the end of the book. So read the unabridged version. And I also just want to give a disclaimer here at the beginning. I don't speak French, so if I butcher a name or mispronounce something, please have mercy on your servant. So without any other preliminary stuff in the way, let's get going. The Count of Monte Cristo is a classic novel about betrayal and redemption, grace and justice, and moving on after excruciating events. Now, another famous novel that was in 19th century France, or came out of 19th century France, was Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And the protagonist in that novel, Jean Valjean, was a crook and a convict who had done a bunch of bad stuff, but found grace and was redeemed and turned into a saint by the end. And so it's an interesting progression from sinner to saint, basically. Now here in this novel, The Count of Monte Cristo, it poses a different question to us because its protagonist, Edmond Dantes, is not some crook, but is actually an upstanding guy who gets terribly wronged. And so the question that it wants us to ask is, how should we respond and what should we do when evil, wicked, terrible things happen to us? What do you do when you face the reality of sin and evil? And so it's some of the themes that we start exploring in this book. And the first theme that I want to talk about is the theme of sin. What happens and what motivates the various characters towards sin in this book? Well, as you look at some of Edmund's friends and even people that he doesn't know, you see a few different things that are motivating them. For Danglars, it is very clearly greed that motivates him. Dantes is getting promoted to ship captain, and he wants that position for himself. He wants the money that that position would bring, the prestige that that position would bring. And so he's the one who hatches this elaborate scheme in the first place. Fernand wants Edmund's fiancée, Mercedes. And so lust is motivating Fernand here. He wants her hand in marriage, and he goes along with the plot that Danglars creates. Caderousse is just kind of like the perfect example of this tag-along kid, this tag-along who gets in with the wrong crowd but never really quite, corrects himself or straightens out. He's drunkenly going along with Danglars and Fernand, but never really stands up for Edmond Dantes. And then later on, he's going to kind of get nagged by his wife, Carsantes, to go and basically murder a jeweler, to steal this really precious diamond and steal the money. But he then ends up murdering his wife too. And then he gets murdered by another crook, Benedetto, later on at the end of the book. So Caderousse is just this guy who has really bad friends and just kind of goes along with the crowd, but is also selfish and cowardly and motivated by greed for himself at the same time. He's just a really interesting tag-along character. And then the final villain is going to be Villefort, the Procureur du Roi, the Minister of Justice, the judge, who he is motivated by loyalty to family to betray Dantes. And so because his father is a revolutionary, a Bonapartist who's loyal to Napoleon, wants to restore Napoleon back to emperor in this particular time setting that the novel is placed in, he basically frames Dantes as being this big Bonapartist revolutionary so that his father will not get caught and will not have to face consequences for being such an royal person, right, and his politics. And so all of these different forces and people come together and take out Dantes, who had the world going for him. He's really an upstanding guy. The world is his oyster at the beginning because he's got his health. He's a good sailor. He's getting promoted to be captain, so he's going to have the prestige of that and some money that comes from that. He's engaged to a beautiful woman named Mercedes. They're going to get married, and he's going to be able to take care of his aging father with the new money that he's going to get from the promotion. So it's just like the whole world is ahead of Dantes when it all comes crashing down, and he's arrested on the day of his wedding, thrown into jail on this island prison, Chateau d'If, and left to languish and rot away, mystified as to why. And so as you start getting into this, there are different motivations that lead the villains into sin. And as you keep reading throughout the book, you get a sense of what sin leads to and the end results of evil are in our lives. Because the whole message of the book is sin may get you ahead temporarily. Betraying someone can get you ahead in the short run, but in the long run, it comes back and it bites. And it even can lead to your own undoing and destruction. And so there's a cautionary tale. What goes around comes around. And this book does a masterful job of demonstrating and showing that, and how all of the villains and the betrayers end up going through very terrible things themselves. Some of them don't make it out alive from the book. Now, Dantes, this book is also an example of grace, the age-old tension and connection between grace on the one hand and justice on the other. While Dantes is in prison, kind of going insane and in a deep, dark depression, the first kind of expression and experience of grace that he has is through Abbe Faria, who is an Italian abbot imprisoned in the same prison. They manage to get connected to each other. And Faria shows him kindness, shows him grace. He teaches him different languages, teaches him in some of the classics, shows him some of his own plans for escape, and kind of involves Dantes in the plots they're making for their escape from prison. And he also solves the riddle of a hidden island treasure from a long-gone wealthy Italian family, a treasure that they hid on the island of Monte Cristo. And what's interesting is that even Abbe Faria's death ends up being something of a gift to Dantes, because Edmund will basically switch the bodies and put himself in the burial sack, and that's going to be the means of his escape. It's really interesting. Now, while he's in prison, Dantes makes a vow that he is going to get revenge against his enemies. And many people have commented on how this novel is about an elaborate tale of revenge. And I agree, but I want to make some qualifiers to that I think some people miss. This isn't your American action movie kind of tale of revenge where the hero kicks open the door, guns blazing, taking out the bad guys in a big bloody mess. No, the way that Dantes pursues revenge is with the weapon of the truth. And he wants the villains, those who've hurt him, those who have done him wrong, he wants them to be exposed and unraveled by the power of the truth. So Dantes isn't going to go out and try to kill all these people or cut them down with a sword or anything. He works diligently and faithfully as a mastermind, researching about their lives, putting into his own entourage crucial people who know things about what they've done, and that will be some of the sources of their own downfall. He just really constructs this plan over years as he also adopts the persona of the Count of Monte Cristo. And so there's a lesson there, I think, about the power of the truth and how truth pierces through all of our fictions, brings us to our knees, and demands that we come to grips with the truth. And I love how this novel really showcases how Dantes uses the power of the truth to get these people to humble themselves. But there's also this sense of revenge that's tempered by grace. because Dantes doesn't kill any of the people that he is seeking to get revenge against, or seeking to bring to justice, might be a better phrase for that. He forgives Caderousse after he gets fatally wounded by Benedetto, exposing that he's really Edmond Dantes. He adopts this persona of the Count of Monte Cristo, and nobody knows who he is for a while. And so he forgives Caderousse in his dying day, in his deathbed. He forgives Danglars after he is taken to prison and extorted out of all of his money and starved for a while. He forgives Danglars after he reveals who he is there. He forgives as well. He forgives Fernand after he exposes himself to Fernand, and Fernand takes his own life because he can't come to grips with just how much wrong he's done. And he also has this interesting interaction with Villefort, who goes insane once he figures out that the Count of Monte Cristo is actually Edmond Dantes. So there's this tinge of forgiveness and grace that after the particular villains have their moment of recognition, and if they repent, not all of them repent, but he always is willing to forgive if they repent here. And so there's a lesson about forgiveness and about not fully living for a life of revenge. And there's even a cautionary tale about how revenge and seeking revenge can take you much farther than you anticipated going, and how the collateral damage revenge can bring about can be much more severe and can even tarnish people that have the noblest of intentions and can seem like the brightest heroes, and turn them into something of a villain as well. That's particularly brought to bear in Villefort's situation, where Dantes encourages his wife Heloise to become a poisoner. She ends up poisoning the whole rest of the family in one way or another. And then she ends up taking her own life and the life of her and Villefort's son, Edouard. And just as Dantes is looking at this lifeless child that has been killed because of he's been caught up in this plot that really Dantes hatched to bring revenge against these families, he shudders and he wonders, oh, maybe I've gone too far here. Was this really worth it? And I think there's just a beautiful cautionary tale there that sometimes revenge, if you go and pursue stridently revenge or justice, you can end up causing more damage than good. And it can turn even the most noble, wounded victims into villains if you are not careful. Revenge can be a very damaging thing if not left constrained by grace and by forgiveness. My favorite part of the book is, and the climax of the book for me, really comes before the duel and during the duel that Dantes has with Mercedes and Fernand's son, Albert. Beforehand, Mercedes goes and visits with Dantes, and she knows that he is Edmond Dantes at this point, that he's not just this persona of the Count of Monte Cristo. She begs for the life of her son, Albert, and she asks that Dantes would have mercy on Albert and would even be willing to take the shot himself. And then she also goes and pleads with her son, Albert, revealing what his father has truly done, and how he betrayed Dantes and threw him into prison so he could take Mercedes as his wife. And there's this moment when Albert and Dantes meet to duel. They're supposed to shoot at each other or kill each other. And Albert ends up renouncing the duel, stopping the duel, saying that he misunderstood, and he apologized to Dantes because he didn't understand all that he was doing. And then he ends up renouncing his own father. And Dantes ended up having to renounce all of his elaborate plans for revenge. They both had to sacrifice something in order to come back together as friends. And I just think this is a haunting and a powerful depiction of reconciliation. I'm a Christian pastor. Reconciliation is one of the hardest things to bring people towards and to work towards in our own lives. It often does require sacrifice in our own lives, and yet it is a piercingly beautiful thing when it happens. It's a miracle, one of the most astounding miracles in life and in the world when it does happen, when people who were formerly enemies come back together as friends. And I think Dumas just has a wondrous portrayal of reconciliation between Albert and between Dantes. I also like how Dantes and Mercedes don't get together. And I think there's a lesson in this book about how sometimes you have to move on. And all of your dreams that you may have had in life don't always come true. People or things that you may have pursued earlier in life, sometimes those doors close, those possibilities expire, and those dreams die. And you just have to move on. The water is under the bridge. Things have changed. Circumstances are different. You can't go back. You can't have what was once a possibility or once something you so eagerly looked forward to or desired. And so there's a message about moving on, but moving on with hope. That just because you've gone through a harrowing or an excruciating experience doesn't mean that your life is over, doesn't mean that you can't find joy in something else and in another pursuit or in different relationships in life. I just think there's a beautiful portrayal there of moving on after loss, moving on after betrayal, moving on after a lot of pain, but also finding joy and finding hope on the other side. And I think that's a wonderful example, really, of how God can meet us. Again, I'm a Christian pastor. I relate it to faith a lot of times, how Jesus can meet us when everything gets taken away from us. He still can give us grace, still can give us hope, and can move us on to a good life beyond what we wanted or dreamed of when that falls away from us. I loved this book. I can see why it's a classic. It is one of my favorite books that I've read. I would love to hear your thoughts. What themes stood out to you? What portions of the book stood out to you? What are your thoughts about the Count of Monte Cristo? Thank you so much for watching. God bless you guys. Grace and peace.